Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for coming along here today to PRONI. My name is Dr Conor Curran, and postdoctoral research fellow in the School of Education at Trinity College Dublin. And my own research is based, at the moment, my research is based around the history of physical education in Ireland. So I've been looking at events in the Republic and in Northern Ireland as well. So, of course, I'm always interested in hearing your views. I was born in Donegal, but you're probably from Northern Ireland, so you have more experience of the Northern Ireland system than I would have, so I'll be interested to hear your views on at the end, on your own experiences of growing up in Northern Ireland within the physical education system in schools and so on. But just to begin today, so basically the talk is about the development of physical education in Northern Ireland, and in some ways it was reflective of events in the field in England in the years immediately prior to the Second World War. But as will be shown, there were distinct differences. Now, while a number of colleges and courses for physical education had been developed in England and Scotland, it wasn't until 1953 that a physical education college was established in Northern Ireland, located at Jordanstown, as you know, outside Belfast. And physical education was taught in many of Northern Ireland's schools, but the facilities and the levels of staff expertise in the subject meant the standards remained low in comparison with other nations in Western Europe, despite the area being part of the United Kingdom. While the need for a physical education college in Northern Ireland had been dismissed in Belfast in the immediate aftermath of the British government's Physical Training and Recreation Act of 1937, by the early 1940s, the realisation that a facility of this nature was necessary was becoming apparent to some of those in the Northern Ireland government. And it was the 1947 Education Act and the expansion of schools which cemented this belief. And in addition, the general failure of Northern Ireland candidates in their applications for a scholarship system based in England's physical training colleges highlighted to key policy makers that something needed to be done to increase the number of Northern Ireland-based physical education teachers and to improve their levels of qualification and expertise to teach the subject. So modern sports, really, modern codified sports as we know them today, they really had their origins in Britain. And again, this was linked into the second half of the 19th century. The traditional pastimes like folk football, they were sort of out of tune with the industrial work that was developing during the Industrial Revolution. You had the Factory Act, and you had tighter confines of urban spaces, and I suppose more restricted working hours in many regards. And it was in this late Victorian, early Edwardian era when many games first took on this codified form and became nationally and regionally governed. And as I said, this was part of the Industrial Revolution, which saw the commercialisation of sport. And you had things like the spread of the railway, the improvement of communications, wage increases, and the laying down of regulations regarding working hours. And in Ireland, it was the main industrial centres, Belfast and Dublin, which were where the patterns of sports early development were more reflective of areas in Britain such as Liverpool, Preston, Manchester or Glasgow. By the beginning of the 20th century, Belfast's population of 349,180 was almost equal to that of Dublin. And soccer was being played in Belfast by the late 1870s. You can see there's a reference to was thought to be one of the first matches in Ireland in 1878. That's kind of been contradicted now by the work of Martin Moore, who has found examples of matches being played as early as 1875 in Belfast. But for a long time, that game there in 1878 between two Scottish teams was thought to be the first association football match in Ireland, but it's kind of...
And ladies got free?
So, yeah, that's been kind of debunked now, that game. But the Irish Football Association was founded in 1880, and professionalism in soccer was legalised by the IFA in 1894. Irish Rugby Football Union was founded in 1879, and cricket was kind of a bit different. Cricket lacked an overall national governing body in Ireland. It wasn't a very popular game by the late 19th century. There was clubs in every county in Ireland. Of course, the military involvement was significant in that. But significantly, it didn't have a county championship structure, and that was one of the reasons, probably, I suppose, along with the weather, why it didn't spread maybe the way it might have done at that stage. The Irish Amateur Athletic Association was founded in 1885. and the GA had been founded in 1884. I suppose it was really seen as an attempt to sort of buck the trend of the development of British sports and colonial nations, colonised nations. I mean, Michael Cusack and Maurice Davitt, who were the founders of the GA, their idea was that, you know, they wanted to revive these pastimes, these traditional Irish pastimes as they saw it, and they set up the GA in 1884. Now, while many peripheral areas around Ireland remained untouched by the sporting revolution at this time, and some pre-codified games continued to be played in areas such as Donegal, sport was beginning to become more institutionalised, and its development was to some extent reflective of wider trends. So again, Belfast and Dublin were the two main industrialised cities in Ireland, and there was some scope there for, you know, developing sport as a business, whereas in more peripheral areas like Donegal, for example, sport spread in other ways. Some of it was through military involvement, others was through seasonal migration, players coming back from Scotland where they'd seen soccer being played and bringing the game back with them. Also had clubs just been set up in rural towns by businessmen who wanted to give young shop apprentices things to do in the evenings. Okay, so I'm just going to look at the actual background to physical education now and its growth and spread in Europe. And the roots of modern physical education, I'll use the term physical education just as a general cover, but I suppose if you were to look at any of the archives back in the early 1900s, it would be described as drill or physical training, but I'm just going to use physical education as kind of umbrella term here. Now, the roots of modern physical education, as we know it in the early 21st century, can be traced back to the Turnen movement of Friedrich Ludwig Jahn, or Turnvater Jahn, pictured there on the left. He had instigated a type of gymnastics in Germany in the early 1800s. There was a ban put in place in this in 1842. 1842, a ban had been put in place in this, and 1842 was removed, and it later became institutionalised in private clubs across Germany, and German gymnastics underwent a process of Verschulung, or scholastification, whereby German educators transformed Friedrich Ludwig Jahn's boisterous open-air activity into an indoor routine closely akin to military drill. And in these German schools, where rows on columns of children moved in response to barked commands, these became a means for the authority to inculcate the political virtues of discipline and unquestioning obedience to authority. Now, Adolf Spice had taught physical education in Basel, having moved there in 1844, and it was there that he established the methods of Schulturnen, or educational gymnastics, which later swept through the system of education in Germany. Now, one of the other, I suppose, the main kind of other type of physical education at that time that was developed by Per Henrik Ling, who was really the founder of Swedish gymnastics, and he drew on the teachings of Gutmus rather than of Jahn, and he established his own system by rejecting these ropes and bars and rings and beams that were commonplace within the Turnen movement. And Per Henrik Ling, who's there on the right, he set up a Central Institute of Physical Education in Stockholm in 1814. In other countries in Europe, in France for example, a gymnastics system was developed by Gymnase Normale Militaire Director Francisco Amros, and that was more popular than the German Turnen, but in England, Ling's methods gained greater popularity. Martina Bergman Osterberg had immense influence on the physical education of British girls, and had trained in the Central Institute of Physical Education in Stockholm. And she was appointed Superintendent of Physical Education for London schools in 1881, and she went on to found the Hampstead Physical Training College 4 years later. In 1895, she set up a college at Dartford in Kent, with the Ling system favoured in her teachings. Though the value of the games was also recognised, and a number of her female students devised rules for the sport of netball in 1900. Now, as Mike Cronin has written, across Europe, physical education through gymnastics primarily was a far more popular force than it was in Britain. And the British system of teaching physical education naturally had an influence on its nearest neighbour, Ireland. And Richard Holt the British sports historian, has stated that drill or gym did not initially have a huge impact on the broader growth of British sport, as a key element in the distinctiveness of the British tradition in British sport lies precisely in the lack of a strong official backing for formal physical training and scientific measurement of average performance. So in contrast to the developments in physical training in Central and Northern Europe that I just looked at, Holt says that gym was for Germans and Britons played rather than exercised. Now, elementary school children in Britain could be taught drill through the implementation of the 1870 Education Act, although this was not compulsory. With the initiation of the 1902 Education Act, a broader programme of physical education was recommended, although trainee teachers only began to receive instruction in the subject in 1908. Despite this lack of focus on the German turning system, educational institutions such as private schools and universities therefore did have a significant role in the growth of modern sport in Britain. And although many private schools had become undisciplined, with students often undermining their teachers by the late 18th century, the work of headmasters eager to see reform, such as Thomas Arnold, pictured here, helped them to regain control of the schools and improve learning, while sport was used as a vehicle to control the students and teach them life lessons. Now, rugby was the code that developed in the school bearing that sport's name, with laws set down by the pupils in 1845. An emphasis was placed on more kicking and less handling of the ball at Eton College, while a number of Cambridge University students decided upon a set of rules for association rather than rugby football. However, it would be incorrect to assume that these codes developed directly through educational establishments or to ignore regional variations in modern sports growth in Britain and Ireland. As Mike Cronin and Roisin Higgins have stated in regard to the Irish education system and physical instruction, most people have their first taste of organised sport in schools. And they've also noticed that the choice of sport within any given school often came down to the interests of principals, individuals, priests, or the favourite sports of any given order. In 19th century Ireland, along with Church of Ireland schools, there were a number of private academies where children of affluent parents could receive education, while the Christian Brothers and other orders also ran schools. The 1831 Education Act was the beginning of standardised education in Ireland, with the 1873 Irish Education Bill strengthening this. While a number of more prestigious schools, including Blackrock College, Clongoweswood, the Royal Schools at Derry, Omagh, and Enniskillen, Cavan, and Armagh, Middleton College and St Coleman's of Newry erected facilities for their pupils' sporting activities, this was not a common trend amongst Irish schools in the 19th century. In addition, a number of schools specialised in sports that were seen to be gender specific, with rugby prominent in Blackrock College, while hockey was provided for girls in Wesley College in Dublin. This is one of the earliest pictures, the earliest cricket team, I think, in Blackrock College, and one of the earliest pictures of a rugby team there as well in Blackrock in 1882. It's taken from the Blackrock College Club history. Now, Brendan Walsh has noted an encouragement of scientific and practical subjects by educational theorists in the late 1800s, as Europe witnessed the rise of the kindergarten and associated movements, and there was a general reassessment of the educative endeavour, and in particular, a desire to revisit the curriculum with a view to creating a balance between academic and practical subjects. The Belmore Commission was initiated in 1897 to assess the possibility of making changes to the Irish curriculum, and resulted in the revised programmes for national schools seeing new subjects such as physical education in 1900. Although the programme was underfunded, the majority of schools continued to teach PE, drawing and singing, and generally the education experience of children improved. Now, by the early 1900s, most educated children brought up in Ireland had come through a system in which, as Gerard Ferreter states, parochial organisation, denominational segregation and clerical management was the norm. The teacher's pay was based on results of pupils, with attendance rates at national school level around 65%, while few were educated to secondary level, as much depended on local circumstances and indeed the degree of regional opulence. And most secondary school teachers did not have degrees at that time. Now, as N.C. Fleming has written, following the formation of the Belfast government in 1921, the work of the new Ministry of Education was initially hampered by delays in transferring staff and powers from Dublin and London, and by the political violence and uncertainty which accompanied the creation of Northern Ireland. In May 1923, R.J. McKeown Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Education, stated that instruction in physical exercise was given in all national schools in Northern Ireland, and about 99,000 boys at present received such instruction. The number of primary schools in Northern Ireland at the end of 1922 was 2,066. In October 1926, the Belfast Education Committee appointed Herbert L. Atkinson of Jesmond, Newcastle upon Tyne as organiser of physical training and games in public elementary schools. Though, as will be seen, his influence doesn't seem to have been that great. The Ministry of Education's annual report for 1926-27 stated that in regard to elementary schools, according to the timetable, at least one period per week is given to physical training, but its practical application to the manner, deportment and carriage of the pupils is too often lost sight of in the interval between lessons. However, it was noted that, on the whole, the subject is fairly well taught. It was also stated that a comparatively new development is the attention paid to organised games, with Belfast said to have been given a valuable lead with football teams involved in inter-schools matches. Provincially based schools were also getting more involved in games, and it was hoped that their teachers would realise the important lessons which can only be learned by organised teamwork, the Ministry of Education stated. Now, one inspector's reports on developments in the west of Northern Ireland in 1926 noted that drill instruction was generally well attended to, although its positive effects were not always to be seen in the bearing and manner of the pupils. By the early 1920s, physical training was an important part of public schools in the newly formed Northern Ireland state, and many school advertisements referring to the subject taught mentioned the physical activities carried out, and annual reports also illuminate the emphasis on winning, tradition and team prestige, with a reviewer of activities in July 1922 at Campbell College, said to be one of the largest, best equipped and most successful schools in the United Kingdom, referring to the success of the rugby team who won the Ulster Schools Challenge Cup for the second year in succession, while the cricket team was said to be the equal of its predecessors. That same summer, at Dungannon Royal School's annual athletic sports, which featured 27 events, pupils gave a capital display of physical training, parallel bar and vaulting horsework, together with groundwork, chair tricks and a quarter-staff demonstration. You can see that report from the Dungannon School in Tyrone there from 1922.
What's the quarter-staff? What would that be? Quarter-staff demonstration. A quarter-staff demonstration?
That's with a big pole.
Like a pole vault?
Yeah. No,
No?
pole that you do exercise with, big thick pole.
All right.
At Ashley House School, which had a well-equipped gym attached, the girls there gave a most interesting demonstration of physical education in the school garden under the direction of Miss E.A. Stollery, who held a diploma from Trinity College of Physical Education. Recruitment of those with specialist qualifications to teach physical training was not uncommon in these schools, and in June 1924, the staff of the Royal Academy in Belfast was said to have been strengthened by the appointment of Miss Doris Morton, who held a first-class diploma from Liverpool Physical Training College, as games mistress and physical instructress for the girls' school. In 1928, the Ministry of Education's annual report stated that methods employed in physical training were gradually changing, with the most efficient schools organising games. And this was said to be of benefit to the pupils' interest, although in some other schools the work carried out in regard to physical training continued to be of a stereotyped character, partly because of the lack of suitable playgrounds. It was also noted that outdoor games and swimming in Belfast had recently undergone a very marked development. In the late 1920s, along with physical training, the elementary school curriculum in Northern Ireland included English, arithmetic, geography, history, drawing, music, needlework, domestic economy, horticulture, nature study, elementary science and Irish, but these subjects were not taught in all schools. Now, developing physical education in technical schools was more difficult in some areas. For example, in 1929, Larne Technical School was still without a playing field, with their annual report noting that physical training was being considered of great importance by the ministry. But by the winter of 1933, they had managed to appoint an instructor for physical training, despite the subject being omitted from the curriculum there until then. Now, by the early 1930s, the teaching of physical education in Northern Ireland schools was influenced by curriculum guidance from England, while exercise undertaken followed Swedish methods, although the time allocated varied from school to school. After a request from the Polish Embassy in May 1930 seeking information on physical culture in Great Britain, the Secretary to the Cabinet in Northern Ireland, C.H. Blackmore, noted in his reply that a course in physical exercise is given in practically every public elementary school in Northern Ireland. The time given to this subject varies from half an hour per week to 15 minutes daily on 4 days per week. The latter practice is being adopted in an increasing number of schools. In all cases, the exercise performed follow the lines of the syllabus for physical training for schools issued by the Board of Education in London and based broadly on the Swedish system of gymnastics exercises. It was also stated that the curriculum prescribed by regulation for all recognised secondary and day schools included physical training, while gymnastics exercises based on the Swedish system for the most part were given to the pupils of practically all these classes of schools. Richard Holt has stated that in Britain, unlike in other European countries where physical training in schools was developed more in line with state policy, there was a very restricted physical education establishment in the form of specialist colleges for teacher training. In addition, these institutions were concerned mainly with gymnastics and confined largely to women until after the Second World War. In 1925, having considered the status of diplomas available at a number of colleges specialising in physical training in England and Scotland, W.A. Houston, the Assistant Secretary to the Northern Ireland Ministry of Education, noted that they would keep the regulations as they were. They would not mention any particular diplomas in their advertisements, as was felt that for some time to come they would probably have to accept as physical training teachers persons who had somewhat inferior paper qualifications, as this would leave them with as free a hand as possible. The Ministry of Education did approve of diplomas from colleges which qualified for membership of the Ling Association, along with the British Association for Physical Training and the Liverpool Physical Training College, pictured here. In particular, correspondence from Irene M. Marsh, who was the principal of the Liverpool Physical Training College, illustrates that many Irish students had attended the college by the mid-1920s, as was the nearest physical training college to Northern Ireland. And the physical training was also included on the curriculum at Stranmillis Training College for elementary teachers, with an instructor specialising in Swedish methods of physical training employed, although at that point Northern Ireland didn't have a physical training college. The public elementary school teachers who had attended Stranmillis College, St Mary's Training College in Belfast for women, or St Mary's Training College, Strawberry Hill in London for men, were recognised by the Minister of Education as having sufficient training undertaken. By the summer of 1936, the Northern Ireland Ministry of Education was organising summer vacation courses in physical training in Belfast. Now, having considered the 1937 Physical Training and Recreation Act in April 1937, a number of members of Cabinet, including Lord Charlemont and J.H. Robb, decided that the circumstances in Northern Ireland did not require anything so pretentious as the organisation which is being set up in Great Britain. In the first place, nothing in the nature of a central college of physical education would be necessary, they felt, as was agreed that there would be no question of setting up local committees outside the machinery of the local authorities themselves. However, they did agree to investigate the facilities for physical education in the province, and a physical training and recreation committee was established. By November 1937, a draft scheme of physical training and recreation had been drawn up by the committee representative of the Ministries of Education, Finance, Home Affairs and Labour, with a view to incorporation within the bill and presentation to Parliament in March 1938. In April 1938, the British government announced details of the Northern Ireland Physical Training and Recreation Bill, with £65,000 to be made available over 3 years to develop physical fitness and related facilities in Northern Ireland. An advisory council paid by the Ministry of Education was to be appointed by the Prime Minister, James Craig, with grants to be given to local authorities or voluntary organisations to promote physical training and recreation facilities. Grants could also be given towards expenses of managers and governing bodies of schools recognised other than public elementary schools in providing facilities for physical training and recreation. The Northern Ireland Government also appointed an organiser and inspector of physical training in November 1937, with L. Bain Dickinson of Allenton, Scotland, recruited to take up the position in the new year. Dickinson was Games Master at Dollar Academy, and his new position came under the Ministry of Education, while his main duty was to advise the Ministry on matters coming within the scope of the new Act. Now, despite these developments and the appointment of an advisory council and a grants committee, progress was slow, and the beginning of the Second World War saw attention diverted elsewhere. Dickinson spent the years from 1940 until the end of 1944 as staff physical fitness officer at RAF's Northern Ireland headquarters, as well as in the headquarters of the RAF's No. 27 group in Gloucestershire, and did not take up the role again until 1945. And the grants committee was temporarily suspended. However, in view of the effect of the blackout and other wartime considerations, by November 1940 it had been reconstituted with more limited powers. Now, at the end of December 1941, in a review of the Public Health Service in Belfast, Dr Thomas Curran, DSO, criticised the system of physical training in public elementary schools and stated that the work requires organisation under a competent director and should be seen as an essential part of the curriculum. In February 1942, the Belfast Education Committee approved the appointment of a female organiser of physical training from April 1943 and a male organiser for after the war would end in accordance with financial provisions available. It was not until February 1944 when Miss Joan Burnett from London, who's pictured there in the train, and also in 1949 she brought the Northern Ireland Gymnastics Lingade team to the Lingade Games in Stockholm. She became appointed as the female training organiser for Northern Ireland. She had some experience of this position within education with the Brighton and East Sussex Education Authorities, and she was said to have 7 years organising experience and was the best qualified of 11 candidates. However, it appears she was unable to take up her duties until November 1944 due to travel restrictions between England and Northern Ireland during the war. Now, she did, as I said, she led the Northern Ireland section of the British team at the Lingade Gymnastics Games in Stockholm in 1949, and she kept her position until 1951 when she moved to West Germany to work as organiser of physical training in the British Families Education Service at that time. And in April 1952, the Belfast Education Committee appointed Dublin woman Doreen M. Byrne as female organiser for physical education. In March 1943, the report of a committee established by the Minister of Education, J.H. Robb, to examine youth welfare in Northern Ireland was released to the press. Amongst their recommendations, they stressed the need for the employment of properly trained physical instructors in schools and felt that after the war, consideration should be given to the foundation of a physical education college there. They also recommended that modern training should be made available by means of summer schools and winter classes. The Gibbon Committee, which was formed to report on the training of teachers, also recommended this move. In July 1943, a memorandum dealing with the Youth Welfare Committee report, Director of Education, Dr. J. Stuart Hunt, had also stated that Northern Ireland should have its own physical training college for teachers who wanted to study the subject specifically. In October 1943, a permanent Youth Welfare Committee superseded the Advisory Council set up under the Physical Training and Recreation Act of 1938 and was said to have both advisory and executive functions. It was established through the Northern Ireland Youth Welfare Bill. And another important move was in February 1944, an Association of Physical Education for Northern Ireland was formed in the Boys Brigade House, May Street, Belfast, with Ms. Deirdre Parker, OBE, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Education, presiding. It was at this meeting that Dr. Hunt again articulated his desire to see a physical education college established. He felt that in Northern Ireland they still had a long way to go in regard to physical education as an aspect of their general education programme, and one of the difficulties was the shortage of trained leaders. Hunt also commented that the province was capable of supporting a physical education college of its own, and the sooner they got it, the better. In the summer of 1946, the Northern Ireland Physical Education Association held its first summer school of physical education over a 2-week period in Bangor. Joan Burnett was responsible for organising the course, and she recalled in a later application form that owing to the difficulty in finding adequate facilities and the lack of experience of those whose cooperation had to be obtained, organising the event was no mean task, she said. The summer school took place the summer school drew around 140 male and female teachers and youth leaders, with accommodation given in 3 hostels while 5 local halls were used for the classes. In August 1947, the Northern Ireland Physical Education Association held its second summer school of physical education, again over a 2-week period. Now, the organisation, in reflecting on the previous year's event, noted that the response to these courses has proved that there is further demand for increased training. Now, it appears that the seaside resort was deemed the most suitable venue, as Bangor was ideally suited to a summer school of this kind, and in addition to the facilities for gymnastics, games, swimming and athletics, excellent holiday entertainment was available. Now, some courses also took place in more regional areas, and in autumn of 1947, a course in physical education for male teachers was held in Newry, and an average nightly attendance of nearly 50 teachers was recorded from schools in South, Down and South Armagh, but it appears there was still a shortage in numbers of those competent enough to teach the subject in secondary schools at that time. And by January 1948, the Northern Ireland Ministry of Education had a scheme in place entitled Emergency Training of Teachers, with training given to ex-members of HM forces and the Merchant Navy in view of teaching physical education in secondary schools. In 1950 to 51, the Ministry of Education ran 10-week courses in art and physical education in Belfast for trained primary school teachers with a view to appointment in intermediate schools. Now, in the Ministry of Education's annual report for 1947-48, it was reported that interest in physical education's development in schools was increasing. However, it was still felt that any general improvement in this branch is seriously handicapped by the large number of poor playgrounds. So playgrounds and facilities remain to be a problem. It was also noted that modern physical training cannot be successfully attempted without adequate equipment, and it was to be expected that under the terms of the Education Act of 1947, ample and suitable supplies would soon become available. And by 1947, with the Education Act, the Minister of Education, Samuel Hall Thompson, was by then more seriously considering the development of a college for physical education training in Northern Ireland, with a view to ensuring that facilities are available to provide for an adequate supply of properly qualified teachers of PE for schools. It was also noted that the present situation in regard to physical education in Northern Ireland is unsatisfactory. And they stated that there is probably no aspect of education in which Northern Ireland is so far behind Great Britain and most other countries. It was also felt that only a small number of places would be available to potential teachers from Northern Ireland within colleges of physical education in Britain, and that they would soon decline to accept any Northern Ireland students in view of educational developments then taking place in England and Scotland. In light of these factors, the Ministry found it was essential that a college of PE be established in Northern Ireland as soon as possible, if the education developments foreshadowed in the new Education Act are not to be seriously impeded. Now, under the 1947 Education Act, Northern Ireland's education system had been amended to bring it into line with the British system, and this meant changes in the grading of schools, as well as teachers, and in the methods of recruiting teachers. So from around 5 years of age until they reached 11 or 12 years old, children attended primary schools, while pupils aged around 11 to 15 years old went to intermediate schools, and the more academically inclined between 11 and 18 attended grammar schools. And technical schools were generally attended by 13 to 16-year-olds, while the pupil-teacher system and the King's Scholarship examination were both removed. The Ministry of Education felt that fully qualified teachers would be needed to staff adequately the posts which should be provided in grammar schools, technical schools, the new intermediate schools, and in connection with the youth service. The new physical education college would, it was initially proposed, run courses based on similar lines to those in Britain, with 1-year course for men and a 3-year course for women who had passed the senior certificate examination at secondary school level. And Ardnalee House in Craigavon, County Down, had been inspected with a view to purchase as a site for the new college, although the Ministry of Education later decided that a site at Dalreed, Jordanstown, County Antrim would be more suitable, as it was only 6 miles from Belfast and had good public transport services. During the war, Irish-based female students who normally would have attended colleges in England instead generally trained at Lyng Physical Training College in Dublin. However, following issues over salary scales and accreditability of the fellowship diploma of the British Association of Physical Training available there, in March 1949, the Northern Ireland Ministry of Education ceased to recognise this award as a qualification to teach physical education in Northern Ireland schools. And naturally this led to issues as a number of teachers who had gained this from Lynn College were teaching in Northern Ireland. So the Ministry of Education held a special physical education examination, mainly consisting of candidates who had attended Lynn College in October 1951 with a view to strengthening their qualifications. A scholarship system was also operational in the late 1940s, but this was not a success. The Northern Ireland Ministry of Education decided to award a limited number of physical education scholarships beginning in September 1947 at physical education colleges in Britain such as Carnegie in Leeds, Bedford, Loughborough and IAM Marsh College of Physical Training in Liverpool. By the end of 1949, however, it was noted by the Ministry of Education that the scholarship arrangement had not been very satisfactory, as the students from Northern Ireland, on account of their inadequate training in the schools, had not been able to compete on equal terms with the other students, apparently. In addition, because of their limited experience, the courses were said to be unsuitable for the Northern Ireland students. This strengthened the notion that Northern Ireland should have its own physical education college, and it was noted that there was a deplorably low standard, perhaps the lowest in Western Europe, in terms of the quality of physical education in Northern Ireland schools. This was reported to be mainly due to the scarcity of teachers with training in the subject. The Ministry had initially looked at a proposal to set up a mixed college for physical training, a co-educational college, but this idea was dropped with three main reasons identified. These being the difficulties of organising such a mixed college. Number one, the authorities of the Roman Catholic Church's opposition to a mixed college. Number two, and thirdly, the offer of Loughborough College to establish a special class for male students from Northern Ireland. Consideration was later given to establishing a physical education college for women in Northern Ireland with a view that would offer a three-year training course for those specialising in physical education. A one-year course would also be provided for students from universities and training colleges. It was also intended to provide a research centre for physical education in order to foster interest in the subject throughout Northern Ireland. While the Roman Catholic authorities were opposed to a residential college for women as well as a mixed college, they had agreed to allow female students to attend the physical education college for women only as non-residential students. Estimates for the number of physical education teachers needed were given as at least 600 by the Ministry, with about 300 of these women. It was also noted that there was only 20 qualified female teachers of physical education in Northern Ireland, with 13 of these fully qualified in teaching in grammar schools, while the remainder said to hold semi-specialist qualifications taught in intermediate schools. It was stated that a fair estimate for the ultimate demand, with marriage and retirement taken into account, would be 150 semi-specialists and 150 specialists. It was also felt that the establishment of a physical education college would cost no more and possibly less to train women students at a college in Northern Ireland than it was costing the Ministry to award physical education scholarships taken at colleges in England. The Ministry therefore felt that costs would not be problematic, while it was noted that inspectors were of the opinion that courses organised would not need excessive staffing. It was also noted there would be a sufficient number of students given the number of candidates for the English scholarships, which was 52, and while the appointment of lecturers could be accommodated by selecting Northern Ireland students who were training in England when they completed their courses there. Early in 1950, the new Minister of Education, Harry Midgley, gave his backing for the immediate purchase of Dalriada in a letter to the Minister of Finance, John Maynard Sinclair. In May 1951, it was noted at Stormont that negotiations were in progress for the purchase of suitable premises, and £7,620 was included in the estimates for that purpose. Northern Ireland, it was felt, should keep abreast of the rest of the United Kingdom in regard to physical training, especially as the number of places which could be allocated to Northern Ireland students in colleges in Great Britain were limited. By the end of 1952, a large disused house had been bought at Dalriada by the Northern Ireland Ministry of Education for conversion into a centre for the training of women physical training instructors for school children. It was also reported that the centre would eventually accommodate 45 trainees at a time. On the 26th of June 1956, the Ulster College of Physical Education, the 9th female physical training college to be established in Britain, was officially opened by Lady Wakehurst at Dalriada, Jordanstown, And she gives certificates to the female students who completed 3 years there, as the college had been operational since September 1953. Its principal was Miss Una Pym, and it remained in operation until the early 1970s when it was incorporated into Ulster Polytechnic. So at the foundation of the Ulster College of Physical Education, an important step had been taken, although men with aspirations of becoming physical training teachers in Northern Ireland, such as Derry Gaelic footballer Jim McKeever, who attended Loughborough College in the early 1950s, generally had to migrate to take up courses in the subject to gain qualifications to teach at a secondary level. While the Northern Ireland Ministry saw the training qualifications at Langley Physical Training College in Dublin as ultimately below the standard they required, by the early 1950s there were, with the development of St Raphael's College at Sion Hill in Dublin, two teacher training colleges for physical education at second level located in Dublin, although these catered only for female students. The physical education in Northern Ireland's primary schools enjoyed higher status than that south of the border, where its status was reduced in the mid-1920s due to conflict between some teachers and inspectors over what was expected to be taught. It is evident that some teachers there lacked the training to teach it, and the physical condition of teachers to implement it was also a source of concern to some Irish politicians. The resources available in many schools in the Irish Free State, particularly in rural areas, discouraged its teaching, not to mention the lack of a clear government policy, with some schools actively developing their own schedules towards implementation. In a half-hearted attempt to implement the Czechoslovakian Sokol system was unsuccessful, and it was not until the 1960s that the Irish government began to take the training of PE teachers more seriously, with the National College of Physical Education opened in Limerick in 1973. Therefore, the claims that the standard of teaching and physical education in Northern Ireland was the worst in Western Europe by the late 1940s seem harsh in comparison with events further south. And while the teachers did receive training in the subject at primary level, at the secondary level where students' appreciation of physical education appears to have suffered in some schools. Like in coaching, developments in physical education training in Northern Ireland were more reflective of those in England, and it was the 1947 Education Act and the expansion of schools which was the key to the decision to develop a college of physical education in Belfast. Thank you.
Okay.